Marcus Thompson woke up at 5 in the morning, just like he had every day for the past 20 years. The difference was that now he did not have to put on a military uniform or grab his weapon. He could stay in his comfortable clothes and walk to his kitchen to make coffee. This was his new life, and he loved every minute of it. 3 years ago, Marcus had bought a small piece of land in a quiet area called Millbrook Heights. The land was 2 acres, which meant it was big enough for him to have privacy, but not so big that he could not take care of it. On his land, he had built a small wooden cabin that had everything he needed. There was a bedroom, a kitchen, a living room, and a bathroom. It was simple, but it was perfect for a man who had spent most of his adult life sleeping in tents and military bases around the world. Behind his cabin, Marcus had built a workshop. This workshop was his favorite place on the entire property. It was where he spent most of his days working on old motorcycles. Marcus had always loved motorcycles, but during his time as a Navy SEAL, he never had time to work on them. Now that he was retired, he could spend as many hours as he wanted fixing engines, painting gas tanks, and making old bikes look new again. Marcus had served his country for 20 years as a Navy SEAL. During those years, he had been to many dangerous places around the world. He had completed missions that most people could never imagine. He had saved lives, protected important people, and fought against enemies who wanted to hurt America. The military had given him medals for his brave service, but Marcus never talked about what he had done. He believed that real heroes did not need to brag about their actions. When Marcus decided to retire from the military, he wanted to find a place where he could live quietly. He did not want to live in a big city with lots of noise and people. He did not want to live in a neighborhood where houses were close together and neighbors always wanted to talk. Marcus wanted peace and quiet. He wanted to wake up and hear birds singing instead of car horns. He wanted to see trees and grass instead of concrete and buildings. Millbrook Heights seemed perfect for Marcus. The area was mostly empty land with only a few houses scattered around. His nearest neighbor lived half a mile away, which meant Marcus could work on his motorcycles without bothering anyone. He could play his music as loud as he wanted. He could work late into the night if he felt like it. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus felt truly free. Every morning, Marcus would drink his coffee and walk around his property. He would check on his small garden where he grew tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. He would look at his motorcycles to decide which one he wanted to work on that day. Sometimes he would just sit on his front porch and watch the sun come up over the trees. These quiet moments meant more to Marcus than all the exciting missions he had completed as a SEAL. Marcus had 4 motorcycles in his workshop. There was a 1969 Harley-Davidson that needed a new engine. There was a 1975 Honda that just needed some paint and new tires. There was a 1980 Yamaha that ran perfectly but looked terrible. And there was a 1965 Indian motorcycle that Marcus was rebuilding from scratch. Each bike was special to Marcus because he was bringing it back to life with his own hands. Working on motorcycles was like therapy for Marcus. When he focused on fixing an engine or painting a gas tank, he could forget about all the difficult things he had seen during his military service. The work kept his hands busy and his mind calm. Sometimes Marcus would spend an entire day working on one small part of a motorcycle. He was never in a hurry because he had nowhere else to be. The people in the area knew that Marcus was a veteran, but they did not know exactly what he had done in the military. Marcus looked like a normal guy. He was tall and strong, but not in an obvious way. He had short gray hair and calm blue eyes. When he went to the store in town, he was always polite to everyone. He said hello to the cashiers and thanked them for their help. People liked Marcus because he was friendly, but never tried to get involved in their business. Marcus had a routine that he followed every day. He would wake up early, drink coffee, and check his property. Then he would work on motorcycles until lunchtime. After lunch, he would read books or watch old movies. In the evening, he would cook dinner and sit on his porch until it got dark. On weekends, he would sometimes take one of his finished motorcycles for a long ride through the countryside. The best thing about Marcus's new life was the silence. During his time as a SEAL, there was always noise. There were helicopters, gunfire, explosions, and people shouting orders. Even when Marcus was sleeping, he had to be ready to wake up and respond to danger. Now, the only sounds Marcus heard were birds singing, wind blowing through trees, and the gentle hum of his motorcycle engines. Marcus had saved money during his military career, so he did not need to work a regular job. His pension from the military was enough to pay for his simple lifestyle. He did not need much money because he did not want many things. He had his land, his cabin, his motorcycles, and his peace. That was enough for Marcus. Sometimes people from town would ask Marcus if he ever got lonely living by himself. Marcus would always smile and say no. He explained that after spending 20 years surrounded by other soldiers, he enjoyed having time to himself. He could think his own thoughts, work at his own pace, and make his own decisions about how to spend each day. Marcus never imagined that his peaceful life would be interrupted. He thought he had found the perfect place to live out his retirement. He believed that as long as he minded his own business and did not bother anyone, people would leave him alone. Marcus had no idea that there were people who saw his land and wanted it for themselves. He did not know that his quiet, simple life was about to become very complicated. For now, Marcus was happy. He had everything he needed and nothing he did not want. His small piece of land felt like paradise after all the dangerous places he had been. Marcus Thompson, the retired Navy SEAL, was finally living the peaceful life he had always dreamed about. Eleanor Blackwood stood in her fancy office looking at a large map on the wall. The map showed all the land around Millbrook Heights. Most of the area was marked with green stickers, which meant the land belonged to her homeowners association. But there was one piece of land that had a red sticker. That piece belonged to Marcus Thompson, and Eleanor wanted it badly. Eleanor was the president of the Millbrook Heights Homeowners Association. She had held this job for 5 years, and during that time she had made herself very powerful. Eleanor was not just interested in making sure people kept their grass cut and their houses painted. She wanted to control as much land as possible so she could build expensive houses and make lots of money. Eleanor was a tall woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive clothes. She always wore high heels and carried a leather briefcase. When Eleanor walked into a room, she expected everyone to pay attention to her. She spoke in a loud, commanding voice and was not afraid to argue with people who disagreed with her. Eleanor believed that she was smarter than everyone else and that her ideas were always the best. Before becoming the HOA president, Eleanor had worked as a real estate developer. She knew how to buy land cheap and turn it into expensive housing developments. Eleanor had made millions of dollars by building luxury homes and selling them to wealthy people. When she took over the HOA, she saw it as a way to expand her business empire. The Millbrook Heights HOA had started small. When it first began, it only controlled about 50 houses in a new subdivision. The rules were simple. People had to keep their lawns neat, paint their houses approved colors, and not make too much noise. Most homeowners were happy with these basic rules because they helped keep property values high. But Eleanor had bigger plans. She began finding ways to expand the HOA's territory. When new houses were built near the original subdivision, Eleanor would convince the builders to join the HOA. She promised them that being part of the association would help them sell houses faster. Many builders agreed because they trusted Eleanor's experience in real estate. Slowly, the HOA grew larger and larger. Eleanor added more rules and higher fees. She hired security guards to patrol the neighborhoods. She created committees to inspect people's houses and yards. She made it mandatory for all homeowners to get approval before making any changes to their property. People who broke the rules had to pay large fines. Some homeowners complained that Eleanor was going too far. They said the HOA was supposed to help the community, not control every detail of their lives. But Eleanor was very good at politics. She knew how to make people believe that strict rules were necessary to protect their property values. She would tell homeowners that without strong HOA control, their neighborhoods would become messy and their houses would lose value. Marcus Thompson's property was a problem for Eleanor because it sat right in the middle of the area where she wanted to build her next big project. Eleanor had plans to build a luxury golf course community with 50 expensive houses. Each house would sell for over $1 million, which meant Eleanor could make a huge profit. But Marcus's land was in the perfect spot for the golf course clubhouse. Eleanor had tried to buy Marcus's land the normal way. She had sent him letters offering to purchase his property for what she called a fair price. But Marcus was not interested in selling. He liked his quiet life and did not want to move somewhere else. When Marcus politely declined her offers, Eleanor became frustrated. Eleanor was not used to people saying no to her. In her business, she usually got what she wanted through persistence and pressure. She decided that if Marcus would not sell his land willingly, she would have to find another way to get it. Eleanor began researching the laws and regulations that might apply to Marcus's property. She spent hours reading county ordinances and zoning rules. Finally, she found something that might work. There was an old law that said the county could force property owners to join a homeowners association if their land posed a safety risk to the surrounding community. The law was confusing and had rarely been used, but Eleanor thought she could make it work if she could prove that Marcus's property was somehow dangerous to his neighbors. Eleanor knew this would not be easy because Marcus kept his land very clean and neat. She would have to find creative ways to make his property look like a safety problem. Eleanor hired a private investigator named Rick Sullivan to watch Marcus and document everything he did. Rick was a former police officer who now worked for lawyers and business people who needed information about other people. Rick was good at his job because he knew how to watch people without being noticed. Rick spent several weeks taking pictures of Marcus's property and writing detailed reports about his daily activities. Rick documented when Marcus worked on his motorcycles, when he played music, and when he had visitors. Rick also took pictures of Marcus's workshop, his motorcycles, and any tools or equipment that might be considered dangerous. Eleanor used Rick's reports to create a list of complaints about Marcus's property. She claimed that Marcus was running an illegal business by fixing motorcycles. She said his workshop was too close to the road and could be a fire hazard. She argued that the noise from his motorcycles disturbed the peace of the community. Eleanor even claimed that Marcus stored dangerous chemicals and tools that could hurt children if they wandered onto his property. Eleanor knew that most of her complaints were not really valid. Marcus was not running a business because he only worked on his own motorcycles. His workshop was built according to all safety codes. The noise from his motorcycles was no louder than a normal car, and there were no children living close enough to his property to be in any danger. But Eleanor was counting on the fact that government officials would not investigate her complaints too carefully. She knew that if she filed enough paperwork and made enough noise, someone would eventually take action against Marcus. Eleanor believed that most people would rather avoid conflict than fight for their rights. Eleanor began her campaign against Marcus by sending him official-looking letters on HOA letterhead. The letters claimed that his property was now subject to HOA rules and regulations. Eleanor demanded that Marcus stop working on motorcycles, remove his workshop, and pay monthly HOA fees. She gave Marcus 30 days to comply with her demands or face legal action. When Marcus received the first letter, he was confused. He knew that his property had never been part of any homeowners association. Marcus had specifically chosen his land because it was outside any HOA territory. He called the county office to ask about Eleanor's claims, but the clerk he spoke to was not sure about the laws Eleanor was citing. Marcus decided to ignore Eleanor's letters at first. He figured that if he did not respond, she would eventually realize that she had no authority over his property and leave him alone. Marcus had no idea how determined Eleanor could be when she wanted something. He did not understand that Eleanor saw his land as the key to her biggest and most profitable development project yet. Eleanor was not surprised when Marcus did not respond to her first letters. She had expected him to ignore her initial demands. But Eleanor was just getting started. She had a whole plan to make Marcus's life so difficult that he would eventually give up and sell his land to her. Marcus first noticed something was wrong when a county inspector showed up at his door on a Tuesday morning. The inspector was a thin man with a clipboard who said he was there to check for reported violations on Marcus's property. Marcus was confused because he had not applied for any permits or done anything that would require an inspection. The inspector walked around Marcus's workshop and took many pictures. He measured distances between buildings and wrote notes on his clipboard. When Marcus asked what violations had been reported, the inspector just shrugged and said he was following up on a complaint. He did not tell Marcus who had made the complaint, or what exactly they were claiming was wrong. After the inspector left, Marcus called the county office to find out what was happening. The woman on the phone told him that someone had filed a complaint, saying his workshop was too close to the property line. She said the inspector would review his findings and send Marcus a letter if any problems were found. Marcus knew his workshop was built correctly because he had carefully measured everything when he built it. A week later, Marcus received a letter saying his workshop was in violation of county setback requirements. The letter said he had to move his workshop at least 5 feet away from his property line or pay a fine of $500. Marcus was angry because he knew the letter was wrong. He had built his workshop exactly where county rules said it should be. Marcus decided to fight the violation. He gathered all his building permits and measurements to prove his workshop was legal. Marcus drove to the county office and spent 3 hours talking to different officials. Finally, a supervisor agreed to send another inspector to double-check the first inspector's work. The second inspector confirmed that Marcus's workshop was built in the right place. The county sent Marcus a letter saying the violation had been dismissed. Marcus was relieved, but he wondered who had made the false complaint in the first place. He had no idea that Eleanor Blackwood was just getting started with her campaign against him. 2 weeks after the workshop incident, Marcus heard loud knocking on his door early in the morning. This time it was an environmental inspector who said someone had reported that Marcus was dumping motor oil and other chemicals into the ground. The inspector spent 2 hours testing Marcus's soil and taking samples from around his workshop. Marcus watched the inspector work and tried to stay calm. He knew he had never dumped any chemicals on his property. Marcus always took his used motor oil to a recycling center in town. He kept all his chemicals stored properly in sealed containers inside his workshop. But Marcus was starting to realize that someone was deliberately trying to cause him trouble. The environmental test results came back clean, just as Marcus knew they would. But a few days later, another inspector arrived to check for unpermitted business activities. This inspector had received a complaint that Marcus was running a motorcycle repair shop without the proper licenses and permits. Marcus explained to the inspector that he only worked on his own motorcycles as a hobby. He was not fixing motorcycles for other people or charging anyone money. The inspector seemed to understand, but he still had to write a report about his visit. Marcus was getting frustrated with the constant interruptions to his peaceful life. The inspections continued for several more weeks. Marcus had visits from the fire department, the health department, and the building code office. Each inspector had received a complaint about Marcus's property, but none of them could find any real violations. Marcus began to suspect that all these complaints were coming from the same person. Marcus decided to do some investigating of his own. He started asking the inspectors more questions about who had filed the complaints against him. Most of them would not give him specific information, but one inspector mentioned that the complaints were coming from a concerned citizen who lives in the Millbrook Heights area. Marcus knew that Eleanor Blackwood was the only person from Millbrook Heights who had contacted him recently. He remembered her letters demanding that he follow HOA rules, even though his property was not part of any homeowners association. Marcus began to suspect that Eleanor was behind all the false complaints against him. To test his theory, Marcus decided to research Eleanor Blackwood and the Millbrook Heights HOA. He spent an afternoon at the county courthouse looking through public records. Marcus learned that Eleanor had been expanding the HOA's territory for several years. He also discovered that several other property owners had filed complaints against Eleanor for harassment and intimidation. The more Marcus learned about Eleanor, the more worried he became. The public records showed that Eleanor had forced several people to sell their property by filing false complaints and making their lives miserable. In each case, Eleanor's real estate company had bought the properties for much less than they were worth. Marcus realized that Eleanor was trying to do the same thing to him. She wanted his land for some kind of development project, and she was willing to use any method necessary to get it. Marcus had dealt with enemies during his time as a Navy SEAL, but those enemies had fought him honestly with weapons and direct attacks. Eleanor was using the legal system and government bureaucracy as her weapons. The harassment got worse as the weeks went by. Marcus received letters almost every day from different government agencies. Someone had complained that his motorcycles were too loud. Someone had reported that he was storing hazardous materials. Someone had claimed that his property was attracting dangerous wildlife. Each complaint required Marcus to take time away from his peaceful retirement to deal with inspectors and paperwork. Marcus tried to maintain his daily routine, but it was becoming impossible. Just when he would settle down to work on a motorcycle, another inspector would arrive at his door. Marcus had to stop what he was doing to answer questions and show the inspector around his property. By the time the inspector left, Marcus had lost his motivation to work on anything. The stress was affecting Marcus's sleep and his appetite. He had served in combat zones where he faced life and death situations, but this bureaucratic warfare was wearing him down in a different way. In combat, Marcus always knew who his enemies were and what they wanted. With Eleanor's campaign of harassment, Marcus felt like he was fighting shadows. Marcus decided to hire a lawyer to help him deal with the constant complaints and inspections. The lawyer was an older man named Robert Chen, who specialized in property rights cases. Robert listened to Marcus's story and looked through all the paperwork from the various government agencies. Robert told Marcus that what Eleanor was doing was called lawfare, using the legal system to harass someone instead of fighting them directly. Robert explained that it was very difficult to stop because Eleanor was technically following proper procedures by filing complaints. Even though the complaints were false, government agencies had to investigate each one. Robert advised Marcus to document everything that was happening. He told Marcus to take pictures of each inspector's visit and keep copies of all the letters and reports. Robert also suggested that Marcus file a harassment complaint against Eleanor, but he warned that it would be difficult to prove that Eleanor was behind all the false reports. Marcus followed Robert's advice and began keeping detailed records of Eleanor's harassment campaign. He also started researching Eleanor's business activities and real estate projects. Marcus discovered that Eleanor had been trying to acquire land for a luxury golf course development. Looking at the maps, Marcus realized that his property was located exactly where Eleanor wanted to build the golf course clubhouse. Now Marcus understood why Eleanor was so determined to get his land. It was not just about expanding her HOA territory. Eleanor needed Marcus's property to complete her most ambitious and profitable development project. Marcus also realized that Eleanor would not stop her harassment until she got what she wanted. Marcus had always been a peaceful man who preferred to avoid conflict. But his military training had taught him that sometimes you have to fight to protect what is important to you. Marcus's land and his quiet retirement were important to him. He decided that he would not let Eleanor Blackwood drive him away from the home he had worked so hard to build. Eleanor Blackwood slammed her phone down on her desk after another frustrating call with her lawyer. For 3 months she had been filing complaints and sending inspectors to Marcus Thompson's property, but nothing was working. Every inspection came back clean. Every violation was dismissed. Marcus was still living on his land, still working on his motorcycles, and still refusing to sell his property to her. Eleanor's investors were getting impatient. She had promised them that the Millbrook Heights Golf Resort would be ready to start construction by the end of the year. The investors had already put millions of dollars into the project, based on Eleanor's assurances that she could acquire all the necessary land. Now they were asking difficult questions about why one small property was holding up the entire development. Eleanor had built her reputation on getting things done. She prided herself on being able to solve any problem and overcome any obstacle. But Marcus Thompson was proving to be more stubborn than anyone she had ever dealt with before. Eleanor was starting to panic because her entire business empire could collapse if this project failed. Eleanor's lawyer had given her bad news during their phone call. He told her that the county had officially ruled that Marcus's property was outside the HOA's jurisdiction. The lawyer also warned Eleanor that Marcus might have grounds to file a harassment lawsuit against her if she continued sending false complaints to government agencies. Eleanor knew she was running out of legal options. She had tried every bureaucratic trick she could think of, but Marcus was fighting back with his own lawyer and winning every battle. Eleanor realized that she needed to try a different approach, something that would convince Marcus to sell his property without involving the legal system. Eleanor began thinking about other ways to pressure Marcus into leaving. She considered hiring people to make noise near his property at night. She thought about spreading rumors in town that Marcus was dangerous or crazy. Eleanor even considered having someone damage Marcus's motorcycles to make him feel unsafe. But all of these ideas seemed risky and might be traced back to Eleanor. She needed something that would scare Marcus enough to make him want to leave, but she also needed to be able to deny any involvement if things went wrong. Eleanor decided she needed help from people who were not afraid to use intimidation and threats. Eleanor remembered hearing about a motorcycle club called the Iron Wolves that operated in the area. She had read in the newspaper that some of their members had been arrested for various crimes, but the club was still active. Eleanor thought that bikers would be perfect for intimidating Marcus because they would seem like the kind of people who might have a natural conflict with a property owner. Eleanor asked her private investigator, Rick Sullivan, to find out more about the Iron Wolves. Rick told her that the club was led by a man named Viktor Kozlov, who everyone called Tank. Rick said that Tank had been in prison twice and that the Iron Wolves were always looking for ways to make money, legal or illegal. Eleanor decided to approach Tank Kozlov with a business proposition. She knew she had to be careful about how she presented her request, because she did not want to say anything that could be used against her later. Eleanor planned to make it seem like she was just a concerned citizen who was having problems with a difficult neighbor. Eleanor found Tank at a bar called Murphy's Tavern, where the Iron Wolves often gathered. Tank was exactly what Eleanor had expected. A huge man with long hair, tattoos covering his arms, and a leather jacket with the Iron Wolves logo on the back. He was sitting at the bar drinking beer and talking loudly with several other bikers. Eleanor was nervous as she approached Tank. She was not used to dealing with people like him, and she felt out of place in the rough bar. But Eleanor forced herself to appear confident as she introduced herself to Tank and asked if she could speak with him privately. Tank looked Eleanor up and down and seemed amused by her expensive clothes and nervous manner. He agreed to talk with her at a table in the corner of the bar. Eleanor could tell that Tank was curious about what a wealthy-looking woman could possibly want from him. Eleanor told Tank that she was having trouble with a neighbor who was causing problems for her community. She explained that the neighbor was a former soldier who had become hostile and threatening toward the families in her neighborhood. Eleanor claimed that the man was working on dangerous machinery that created noise and pollution. Eleanor said she had tried all the legal methods to resolve the problem, but the man was using his military connections to avoid following the rules. She told Tank that she was worried about the safety of the children in her community, but the police would not take action because the man was a veteran. Tank listened to Eleanor's story without saying much. Eleanor could tell that he was smart, despite his rough appearance. Tank asked several questions about Marcus's property and his military background. Eleanor answered carefully, trying to make Marcus sound more dangerous and unreasonable than he really was. Finally, Eleanor made her proposal. She told Tank that she would pay him $50,000 if he and his club could convince the troublesome neighbor to move away from the area. Eleanor emphasized that she did not want anyone to get hurt. She just wanted the man to realize that he was not welcome in the community and decide to leave on his own. Tank was interested in Eleanor's offer, but he wanted to know more details. Eleanor gave him Marcus's address and described his property. She also gave Tank some of the photographs that her private investigator had taken of Marcus's workshop and motorcycles. Eleanor told Tank that the job should be easy because Marcus was just one man living alone. She said that a few visits from Tank and his club members would probably be enough to convince Marcus that he should find somewhere else to live. Eleanor promised Tank that there would be a bonus payment if Marcus agreed to sell his property within 30 days. Tank agreed to Eleanor's proposal, but he insisted on being paid half the money up front. Eleanor was nervous about giving Tank $25,000 before he had done anything, but she felt like she had no choice. Her investors were pressuring her, and she was running out of time to acquire Marcus's property. Eleanor and Tank met the next day at a bank where Eleanor withdrew the money from her business account. She gave Tank the cash in a plain envelope and reminded him that she wanted Marcus to leave voluntarily, without anyone getting seriously hurt. Tank assured Eleanor that he and his club knew how to handle situations like this. Tank told Eleanor that the Iron Wolves would visit Marcus's property within a few days. He said they would start with verbal warnings and minor intimidation. If Marcus did not respond to their initial approach, Tank promised that they would escalate their tactics until Marcus decided to leave. Eleanor felt a mixture of relief and anxiety as she watched Tank leave the bank with her money. She was glad to finally have a plan that might work, but she was also worried about what Tank and his club might do to Marcus. Eleanor told herself that she was not responsible for whatever happened because she had specifically told Tank that she did not want anyone to get hurt. Eleanor also convinced herself that what she was doing was justified because Marcus was being unreasonably stubborn. She believed that Marcus was just one person who was standing in the way of a development project that would benefit the entire community. Eleanor thought that sometimes difficult people needed to be pressured into doing the right thing. What Eleanor did not know was that Tank had looked up information about Marcus Thompson after their meeting. Tank had discovered that Marcus was not just any former soldier. He was a retired Navy SEAL with 20 years of combat experience. Tank was beginning to realize that Eleanor had not told him the complete truth about the man they were supposed to intimidate. Tank was also smart enough to understand that Eleanor's story about concerned families and children did not make sense. Marcus lived alone on isolated property where there were no families or children nearby. Tank suspected that Eleanor had her own business reasons for wanting Marcus to leave, but he did not care about her motives as long as she paid him. Tank began planning his approach to Marcus's property. He decided to bring 7 other Iron Wolves members with him to make sure Marcus understood that he was outnumbered. Tank planned to start with loud motorcycles and verbal threats. He figured that most people would be intimidated by 8 angry bikers showing up at their door. Tank had no idea that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Marcus was in his workshop rebuilding the carburetor on his 1969 Harley-Davidson when he heard the sound of multiple motorcycles approaching his property. At first, he thought it might be some tourists who had gotten lost while riding through the countryside. Marcus often heard motorcycles on the main road, but they rarely came down his private driveway. The sound got louder and closer. Marcus could tell from the deep rumble of the engines that these were big Harley-Davidson motorcycles, probably older models with loud exhaust pipes. Marcus set down his tools and walked to the window of his workshop to see what was happening. 8 motorcycles roared up his driveway and formed a semicircle in front of his cabin. The riders were all wearing leather jackets and looked like members of a motorcycle club. Marcus could see patches and logos on their jackets, but he could not read them clearly from inside his workshop. The bikers shut off their engines, but they stayed on their motorcycles as if they were ready to leave quickly if necessary. Marcus immediately knew this was not a friendly visit. During his 20 years as a Navy SEAL, Marcus had developed strong instincts about danger. Something about the way the bikers had positioned themselves and the timing of their arrival told Marcus that they were there to cause trouble. Marcus remained calm and began assessing the situation like he had been trained to do in the military. He counted 8 men, all of them large and wearing heavy boots and leather jackets. Most of them had long hair and beards. Several of them had visible tattoos on their arms and necks. Marcus could see that at least 2 of the bikers had small chains hanging from their belts that could be used as weapons. The largest biker climbed off his motorcycle and started walking toward Marcus's cabin. This man was huge, probably 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing at least 250 pounds. He had a thick black beard and arms covered with prison tattoos. The patch on his jacket said Tank, and below that it said President in smaller letters. Marcus stepped out of his workshop and walked calmly toward his cabin. He wanted to meet the bikers in an open area where he would have room to move if the situation became violent. Marcus also wanted to be closer to his cabin in case he needed to call for help or retrieve any defensive equipment. Tank stopped about 10 feet away from Marcus and looked him up and down. Marcus could tell that Tank was trying to intimidate him with his size and aggressive posture. Tank had probably used this technique successfully on many other people, but Marcus had faced much more dangerous enemies during his military career. "You Marcus Thompson?" Tank asked in a loud, threatening voice. "Yes, I am," Marcus replied calmly.
"What can I do for you?"
Tank smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. "We're here to give you some advice, old man. This neighborhood is changing and you don't fit in anymore. It's time for you to pack up your stuff and find somewhere else to live." Marcus kept his voice steady and polite. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm happy living here. This is my property and I plan to stay." Tank's smile disappeared and his voice became more aggressive. "You don't understand what I'm telling you. This isn't a request. People around here don't want you and your noisy motorcycles disturbing their peace. You need to sell this place and move somewhere else." Marcus realized that someone had sent these bikers to threaten him. He suspected that Eleanor Blackwood was behind this visit, but he did not say anything about his suspicions. Marcus wanted to see how far the bikers would go before he decided how to respond. "Who exactly has complained about me?" Marcus asked. "I don't have any close neighbors, and I've never had anyone tell me directly that my motorcycles were bothering them." Tank pointed toward the other bikers who were still sitting on their motorcycles. "These are my friends from the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club. We represent the interests of this community, and we're telling you that you're not welcome here." Marcus almost laughed at Tank's claim that a motorcycle club represented the community's interests. Marcus knew that motorcycle clubs like the Iron Wolves were usually involved in illegal activities and had no connection to legitimate community organizations. But Marcus kept his expression serious because he understood that the situation could become dangerous very quickly. One of the other bikers revved his engine loudly and shouted, "You heard what Tank said, old man. Time to get moving." Tank walked closer to Marcus, trying to use his size to intimidate him. "We're going to come back here every day until you're gone, and each time we come back we're going to be a little less polite. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Marcus nodded calmly. "I understand that you're threatening me, but I think you should know that I'm not easily intimidated. I've dealt with much worse than you during my military service." Tank laughed loudly. "Military service? What are you, some kind of weekend warrior who thinks he's tough because he wore a uniform? This isn't the army, old man. This is the real world. And in the real world, 8 angry bikers can make your life very unpleasant." Another biker climbed off his motorcycle and picked up a large rock from Marcus's driveway. Without warning, he threw the rock at one of Marcus's cabin windows. The window shattered with a loud crash and pieces of glass fell to the ground. "Oops," the biker said with a nasty grin. "Looks like you're going to need to fix that window. Of course, if you're not living here anymore, you won't have to worry about it." Marcus felt his anger rising, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had learned during his SEAL training that losing your temper in a dangerous situation could get you killed. Marcus continued to assess the threat level and plan his response options. Tank kicked over Marcus's mailbox, sending it crashing to the ground. "Like I said, we're going to be back every day. And every day something else might accidentally get broken. Maybe tomorrow it will be your workshop windows. Maybe the day after that one of your precious motorcycles might get damaged." The other bikers laughed and began revving their engines again. The noise was extremely loud and meant to show Marcus that they could make as much disturbance as they wanted. Marcus noticed that several of the bikers were looking around his property, probably planning what they would damage during their next visit. Tank walked back toward his motorcycle, but he turned around to face Marcus one more time. "You've got 24 hours to think about what we've told you. Tomorrow we're coming back and we're going to be less friendly. If you're smart, you'll start packing today." Marcus watched as Tank climbed back onto his motorcycle and started the engine. The 8 bikers rode slowly around Marcus's property, deliberately crushing some of his flowers and leaving tire tracks in his carefully maintained yard. They were showing Marcus that they could damage his property whenever they wanted. As the bikers rode back down his driveway, Marcus stood perfectly still and watched them go. He was analyzing everything he had seen and heard during the confrontation. Marcus was already planning how he would respond when the bikers returned, because he was certain they would keep their promise to come back. Marcus had faced many dangerous enemies during his military career, but those enemies had usually been professional soldiers who understood the rules of combat. These bikers were criminals who relied on intimidation and violence against ordinary civilians. They probably expected Marcus to be frightened and helpless like most of their previous victims. Marcus walked over to his broken window and began picking up the pieces of glass. As he cleaned up the damage, Marcus was already deciding what he would do when Tank and his gang returned. Marcus had tried to handle this situation peacefully, but the bikers had chosen to escalate to property damage and direct threats. Marcus Thompson, the retired Navy SEAL, was about to show the Iron Wolves that they had made a serious mistake when they decided to threaten him. The Iron Wolves returned exactly 24 hours later, just as Tank had promised. Marcus heard them coming long before they reached his property. This time they were making even more noise with their motorcycles, revving engines and honking horns as they rode up his driveway. Marcus was ready for them. Marcus had spent the previous evening preparing for their return. He had called his lawyer to report the threats and property damage. He had also called the county sheriff's office to file a complaint. But the deputy who took his report said they could not do much unless the bikers actually hurt someone or committed a serious crime. Marcus had also spent time thinking about how he would handle the situation if the bikers became violent. During his 20 years as a Navy SEAL, Marcus had been trained in dozens of different combat techniques. He knew how to disarm attackers, how to fight multiple opponents, and how to neutralize threats quickly and efficiently. But Marcus had hoped he would never need to use those skills again. After retiring from the military, Marcus had worked hard to become a peaceful man who avoided conflict. He enjoyed his quiet life and did not want to hurt anyone, even people who were threatening him. The 8 bikers formed the same semicircle in front of Marcus's cabin that they had used the day before. This time, however, Several of them were carrying weapons. Marcus could see baseball bats, tire irons, and heavy chains. The bikers were clearly planning to escalate their intimidation tactics. Tank climbed off his motorcycle and walked toward Marcus with a confident swagger. He was grinning like he expected Marcus to be scared and ready to surrender. Tank had probably used the same approach successfully many times before with other victims. "Well, old man, have you thought about our conversation yesterday?" Tank called out. "Are you ready to start packing, or do we need to help you make up your mind?" Marcus stepped out of his cabin and walked calmly toward Tank. Marcus's posture was relaxed, but his eyes were alert and focused. Marcus was using his military training to assess each biker's position, weapons, and likely attack patterns. "I've thought about it," Marcus replied in a steady voice, "and I've decided that I'm not going anywhere. This is my property, and I have every right to live here peacefully." Tank's grin became a snarl. "Wrong answer, old man. Looks like we're gonna have to do this the hard way." Tank gestured to his gang members, and 3 of them climbed off their motorcycles. One biker had a baseball bat, another had a tire iron, and the third had a heavy chain wrapped around his fist. They began walking toward Marcus's workshop, clearly planning to smash his equipment and motorcycles. Marcus felt something change inside him as he watched the bikers move toward his workshop. For 3 years, Marcus had worked peacefully on his motorcycles in that workshop. It was his sanctuary, the place where he found peace after decades of violence and war. These criminals had no right to destroy what he had built. The biker with the baseball bat reached Marcus's workshop first. He raised the bat above his head and prepared to smash the window of Marcus's 1969 Mustang, which was parked next to the workshop. The car was Marcus's most prized possession, a classic vehicle he had spent 2 years restoring to perfect condition. That was the moment when Marcus Thompson, the peaceful retiree, disappeared. In his place stood Marcus Thompson, the Navy SEAL who had survived 20 years of the most dangerous military operations in the world. Marcus moved faster than any of the bikers expected. In 2 quick steps, he closed the distance between himself and the biker with the baseball bat. Marcus grabbed the bat with both hands and twisted it away from the biker in one smooth motion. The move was so fast and unexpected that the biker had no time to resist. With the baseball bat now in his hands, Marcus immediately spun around and struck the second biker in the stomach with the bat handle. The biker doubled over in pain and dropped his tire iron. Marcus kicked the tire iron away and turned to face the third biker, who was still holding the heavy chain. The biker with the chain tried to swing it at Marcus's head, but Marcus had already anticipated the attack. Marcus ducked under the chain and grabbed the biker's wrist. Using a technique he had learned in SEAL training, Marcus twisted the biker's arm and forced him to drop the chain. Then Marcus swept the biker's legs and knocked him to the ground. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 10 seconds. 3 armed bikers were now on the ground, disarmed and unable to fight. The other 5 bikers, including Tank, stood frozen in shock. They had expected to intimidate an elderly man, but instead they were watching someone who moved like a professional fighter. Tank recovered from his surprise and pulled a large knife from his belt. "You think you're tough, old man? Let's see how tough you are when you're bleeding." Tank charged at Marcus with the knife held high above his head. But Tank was a brawler who relied on size and intimidation. Marcus was a trained killer who had fought enemies much more dangerous than Tank. Marcus stepped to the side as Tank rushed past him. Then Marcus grabbed Tank's knife hand and twisted it behind Tank's back in a move called an armbar. Tank screamed in pain and dropped the knife. Marcus increased the pressure until Tank was forced to his knees. "Listen carefully," Marcus said in a calm, quiet voice that was somehow more frightening than shouting. "I spent 20 years as a Navy SEAL. I have been trained to neutralize threats much more dangerous than a bunch of weekend bikers. You came to my property, threatened me, damaged my home, and tried to destroy my possessions. That was a mistake." Marcus released Tank's arm and stepped back. Tank remained on his knees, cradling his injured arm and looking up at Marcus with fear in his eyes. The other bikers had not moved from their motorcycles. They were beginning to understand that they had seriously misjudged their target. Marcus picked up Tank's knife and the other weapons the bikers had dropped. "You have 2 choices," Marcus continued. "You can leave my property right now and never come back, or you can stay here and wait for the police to arrive. I have already called the sheriff's office and reported that armed men are threatening me on my own property." Tank struggled to his feet, still holding his injured arm. He looked around at his gang members who were all watching him to see what he would do. Tank realized that his reputation as a tough leader was being destroyed by one man who was probably old enough to be his father. But Tank also realized that Marcus was not bluffing about being dangerous. Tank had been in many fights during his criminal career, but he had never faced anyone who moved with such speed and precision. Tank understood that if this fight continued, someone was going to get seriously hurt, and it probably would not be Marcus. "This isn't over, old man," Tank said, trying to sound threatening despite his obvious defeat. "You might have gotten lucky today, but we know where you live. We'll be back when you're not expecting us." Marcus smiled, but it was not a pleasant smile. "I hope you do come back. But next time you should bring more than 8 men, and you should probably bring better weapons than baseball bats and chains. During my military career, I dealt with people who had real weapons and real training. You and your friends are amateurs." Tank helped his injured gang members get back on their motorcycles. The bikers who had been knocked down were moving slowly and painfully. Tank's arm was clearly injured, and he had trouble starting his motorcycle with one hand. As the Iron Wolves prepared to leave, Marcus called out to them one more time. "Tell whoever sent you that their plan failed. Tell them that if they want me to leave my property, they're going to have to try something better than sending a motorcycle club to threaten me." Tank looked back at Marcus with hatred in his eyes, but he did not say anything else. Tank knew that Eleanor Blackwood was not going to be happy when she learned that her $50,000 investment had failed so completely. The Iron Wolves rode away from Marcus's property much more quietly than they had arrived. They were no longer revving their engines or making loud noises. They just wanted to get away from the man who had single-handedly defeated their entire gang. Marcus watched them go, then began picking up the weapons they had left behind. He would turn these over to the police as evidence when they arrived to take his report. Marcus also made a mental note to check his security cameras to make sure he had recorded the entire confrontation. As Marcus cleaned up the mess from the fight, he felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. He was glad that he had been able to defend his property and his possessions. But Marcus was also sad that his peaceful retirement had been interrupted by violence once again. Marcus had hoped that his fighting days were over when he left the military. But sometimes, Marcus realized, peaceful men have to fight to protect the things they value most. The police arrived at Marcus's property 30 minutes after the Iron Wolves had fled. 2 patrol cars and a sheriff's deputy pulled up to Marcus's cabin, their red and blue lights flashing in the afternoon sun. Marcus had called 911 immediately after the bikers left, and he was waiting on his front porch when the officers arrived. Deputy Sarah Martinez was the first officer to reach Marcus. She was a veteran police officer who had worked in the county for 12 years. Deputy Martinez had dealt with motorcycle clubs before, and she knew they could be dangerous when they traveled in groups. She was surprised to see that Marcus appeared calm and uninjured after reportedly being threatened by 8 armed bikers. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Deputy Martinez. We received your call about an assault and threats on your property. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" the deputy asked as she approached Marcus. "I'm fine, Deputy," Marcus replied, "but I have several weapons that the attackers left behind, and I have video footage of the entire incident. I think you're going to want to see this." Deputy Martinez raised her eyebrows. It was unusual for victims of biker gang attacks to have successfully defended themselves, much less to have weapons and video evidence. She called for her partner, Officer James Burke, to join them as Marcus led them toward his workshop. Marcus showed the officers the baseball bat, tire iron, chain, and knife that the bikers had brought to his property. He explained how each weapon had been used to threaten him and damage his property. Marcus also pointed out the broken window from the previous day's visit and the tire tracks the bikers had left in his yard. "You said you have video footage?" Officer Burke asked. "How did you manage to record the attack?" Marcus led the officers to his cabin and showed them his security camera system. Marcus had installed cameras around his property when he first moved in, partly because of his military background and partly because he wanted to keep an eye on his valuable motorcycles. The cameras had captured everything that happened during both visits from the Iron Wolves. Deputy Martinez watched the video footage with growing amazement. The cameras clearly showed 8 bikers arriving on Marcus's property with weapons. The footage showed them threatening Marcus, damaging his window and kicking over his mailbox. But most importantly, The cameras had recorded the fight where Marcus had single-handedly defeated 3 armed attackers. "Mr. Thompson," Deputy Martinez said after watching the video, "can you tell me about your background? That was some pretty impressive fighting for someone who claims to be a retired civilian." Marcus smiled and handed Deputy Martinez a folder containing his military records. "I served 20 years as a Navy SEAL. I retired 3 years ago and moved here because I wanted a quiet life. Unfortunately, some people have been trying to force me off my property, and today they escalated to sending armed men to threaten me." Officer Burke looked through Marcus's military records and whistled softly. Marcus's file showed that he had received numerous medals for valor and had completed some of the most dangerous missions in SEAL history. Officer Burke realized that the Iron Wolves had made a serious mistake when they decided to threaten this particular veteran. Deputy Martinez asked Marcus to explain the background of his conflict with the bikers. Marcus told her about Eleanor Blackwood's harassment campaign, the false complaints to government agencies, and his suspicion that Eleanor had hired the Iron Wolves to intimidate him. Marcus provided the officers with copies of all the letters and reports from the various inspections of his property. "Do you have any proof that this Eleanor Blackwood hired the bikers?" Deputy Martinez asked. "Not direct proof," Marcus admitted, "but the timing is suspicious. The harassment from her HOA stopped right before the bikers started threatening me, and one of the bikers specifically mentioned that I didn't fit in with the neighborhood, which sounds like something an HOA president would say." Deputy Martinez nodded and made notes in her report. She had heard of Eleanor Blackwood and knew that several other property owners had filed complaints against her for harassment. Deputy Martinez was beginning to see a pattern in Eleanor's behavior. While the officers were interviewing Marcus, their radio crackled with an important message. The dispatcher reported that someone had called 911 from Murphy's Tavern, saying that several injured bikers had arrived asking for help. The caller said the bikers were claiming they had been attacked by a crazy old man with military training. Deputy Martinez and Officer Burke exchanged glances. "Mr. Thompson, I think we're about to get the other side of this story," Deputy Martinez said. "Would you mind coming with us to identify the men who threatened you?" Marcus agreed to accompany the officers to Murphy's Tavern. He rode in the back of Deputy Martinez's patrol car while Officer Burke followed in his own vehicle. As they drove toward the tavern, Deputy Martinez radioed for backup because she expected the situation at the bar to be tense. When they arrived at Murphy's Tavern, they found Tank Kozlov and his 7 gang members sitting at tables near the back of the bar. Several of the bikers were clearly injured from their fight with Marcus. Tank was holding his arm in a makeshift sling, and 2 other bikers had visible bruises and cuts on their faces. The bar owner, an elderly man named Murphy O'Brien, approached the officers as they entered. "Thank God you're here," Murphy said. "These guys showed up about an hour ago claiming they were attacked. They've been drinking heavily and talking about getting revenge on someone. I was afraid they might start a fight with my other customers." Deputy Martinez approached Tank's table with Marcus following behind her. When Tank saw Marcus, his face turned red with anger and embarrassment. Tank started to stand up, but Officer Burke quickly moved to position himself between Tank and Marcus. "Mr. Kozlov, I'm Deputy Martinez with the County Sheriff's Office. We've received reports that you and your associates threatened and attacked a property owner earlier today. We have video evidence of the incident and we're here to place you under arrest." Tank looked shocked. He had expected to be treated as a victim, not as a criminal. "That old man attacked us," Tank protested. "We were just trying to talk to him about a neighborhood problem, and he went crazy and started fighting us." Deputy Martinez pulled out her phone and showed Tank the video footage from Marcus's security cameras. The video clearly showed Tank and his gang arriving with weapons, threatening Marcus and damaging his property. The footage also showed Marcus defending himself only after the bikers had escalated to violence. "Mr. Kozlov, this video shows you and your associates committing multiple felonies," Deputy Martinez said. "I can see assault with deadly weapons, criminal threats, vandalism, and trespassing. You have the right to remain silent." As Deputy Martinez began reading Tank his rights, Officer Burke started arresting the other Iron Wolves members. Several additional police officers had arrived to help with the arrests, and soon all 8 bikers were in handcuffs. Tank was angry and desperate. He realized that he was facing serious criminal charges that could send him back to prison for many years. In his desperation, Tank decided to try to make a deal with the police by revealing who had hired him. "Wait," Tank called out as Officer Burke was leading him toward a patrol car. "I want to make a deal. The old man wasn't our real target. Someone paid us to threaten him. I can give you the person who hired us." Deputy Martinez stopped and turned around. "Who hired you, Mr. Kozlov?" Tank looked around nervously, then spoke in a lower voice. "A woman named Eleanor Blackwood. She's the president of some homeowners association. She paid me $25,000 to scare the old man into selling his property. She said it was for some kind of development project." Deputy Martinez felt a surge of excitement. If Tank was telling the truth, they might be able to arrest Eleanor Blackwood for conspiracy and solicitation of violence. These were serious felony charges that could send Eleanor to prison for many years. "Do you have any proof that Miss Blackwood hired you?" Deputy Martinez asked. Tank nodded eagerly. "She gave me cash, but I have her phone number in my phone, and some of my guys heard the conversation when she explained what she wanted us to do. We can testify against her if you give us a deal on these charges." Officer Burke looked at Marcus, who was standing quietly and listening to Tank's confession. "Mr. Thompson, it looks like your suspicions about Eleanor Blackwood were correct. We're going to need you to file a formal complaint against her as well as against these bikers." Marcus nodded. "I'll do whatever is necessary to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Eleanor Blackwood has been harassing me for months, and now she's escalated to hiring criminals. She needs to be stopped." Deputy Martinez radioed her supervisor to report that they had evidence of a conspiracy involving Eleanor Blackwood. Within an hour, detectives were on their way to arrest Eleanor at her office. The investigation was moving quickly because Tank and several other Iron Wolves members were eager to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. As the police led the bikers away in patrol cars, Marcus felt a sense of relief. For months he had been dealing with harassment and threats, but now the people responsible were finally being held accountable. Marcus realized that his military training had not only helped him defend his property, but it had also helped him gather the evidence needed to bring. Eleanor Blackwood was arrested at her real estate office at 6 o'clock that evening. Detectives found her working late, probably trying to figure out why Tank Kozlov had not called to report that Marcus Thompson had agreed to sell his property. Eleanor's face went white when the detectives told her that Tank and his entire gang were in jail and had confessed to being hired by her. The news of Eleanor's arrest spread quickly through Millbrook Heights and the surrounding communities. Local television stations picked up the story because it had all the elements that made for exciting news: a corrupt HOA president, a motorcycle gang, and a heroic Navy SEAL veteran. The story became even more interesting when reporters learned about Eleanor's months-long harassment campaign against Marcus. Eleanor tried to deny everything at first. She claimed that she had never met Tank Kozlov and knew nothing about any threats against Marcus Thompson. But the evidence against Eleanor was overwhelming. Tank had given police her phone number, which matched calls to his phone. 2 other Iron Wolves members confirmed that they had heard Eleanor explain what she wanted them to do to Marcus. Most damaging of all, Eleanor had withdrawn $25,000 from her business bank account on the same day that Tank said she had paid him. When police searched Eleanor's office, they found copies of all the false complaints she had filed against Marcus, along with her plans for the golf course development that required his property. The district attorney decided to charge Eleanor with multiple felonies, including conspiracy, solicitation of violence, criminal intimidation, and filing false police reports. Eleanor's lawyer told her that she could face up to 15 years in prison if she was convicted on all charges. The lawyer advised Eleanor to accept a plea bargain, but Eleanor was too proud and angry to admit defeat. Eleanor's legal troubles got worse when other victims of her harassment came forward. 3 other property owners filed lawsuits against Eleanor and the HOA, claiming that she had used similar tactics to force them to sell their land below market value. The local newspaper published a detailed investigation of Eleanor's business practices, revealing that she had made millions of dollars by bullying people into selling their property cheap. The Millbrook Heights HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Eleanor as president. The board also issued a public apology to Marcus and the other victims of Eleanor's harassment. The board promised to investigate all of Eleanor's actions and to compensate anyone who had been wronged by her illegal tactics. Eleanor's real estate empire began to collapse within weeks of her arrest. Her investors pulled out of the golf course project when they learned about the criminal charges against her. Several of Eleanor's other development projects were canceled when banks refused to continue lending money to someone facing multiple felony charges. Tank Kozlov and the Iron Wolves received varying sentences based on their cooperation with police and their criminal histories. Tank, who had previous convictions for assault and drug possession, was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The other gang members received sentences ranging from 6 months to 3 years, depending on their level of involvement in the attack on Marcus. The Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club was officially disbanded after the arrests. Several members who had not been involved in the attack on Marcus decided to leave the area and join other clubs. The few remaining members were too afraid of legal problems to continue operating as an organized group. Marcus became something of a local hero after the story was reported in the news. Veterans organizations invited him to speak at their meetings about standing up to bullies and protecting property rights. Marcus was uncomfortable with the attention at first, but he realized that his story could help other veterans who might face similar problems. The American Legion post in the nearby town asked Marcus to help them start a new program. They wanted to teach self-defense and property security to elderly veterans who might be targeted by criminals or con artists. Marcus agreed to volunteer for the program because he believed that veterans should help each other. Marcus also received an unexpected financial windfall from his legal victory. The HOA's insurance company settled Marcus's lawsuit for $200,000 to avoid a lengthy court battle. Eleanor's personal insurance company paid an additional $100,000 to settle Marcus's claims against her personally. Marcus used some of the settlement money to improve his property. He built a larger workshop and bought new equipment for restoring motorcycles. Marcus also installed better security cameras and lighting around his property, not because he expected more trouble, but because the experience had taught him the importance of being prepared. But the most important thing Marcus did with his settlement money was to start a nonprofit organization called Wheels for Warriors. The organization taught motorcycle repair and restoration skills to unemployed veterans who were struggling to find work after leaving the military. Marcus believed that working with motorcycles had helped him adjust to civilian life after his military career. He wanted to give other veterans the same opportunity to learn valuable skills while working on projects that gave them a sense of accomplishment. The program also helped veterans connect with each other and build friendships based on their shared military experience. The first group of veterans who joined Marcus's program included men and women from different branches of the military. Some had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, while others had served in peacetime roles. All of them were looking for purpose and direction in their civilian lives. Marcus taught the veterans how to rebuild engines, repair electrical systems, and restore vintage motorcycles to like-new condition. But the program was about more than just learning technical skills. Marcus also talked with the veterans about dealing with stress, finding peace after military service, and standing up for themselves when people tried to take advantage of them. Local motorcycle dealerships and parts suppliers donated materials and equipment to Marcus's program. Several car collectors also donated old motorcycles that needed restoration. Marcus's workshop became a busy place where veterans gathered several days a week to work on projects and help each other. The success of Marcus's program attracted attention from veterans organizations across the country. Marcus was invited to speak at conferences and help other communities start similar programs. Marcus traveled to several states to train other veterans in how to set up motorcycle restoration workshops. Eleanor Blackwood's criminal trial took place 8 months after her arrest. Despite her lawyer's advice to accept a plea bargain, Eleanor insisted on fighting the charges in court. She believed that her wealth and connections would help her avoid serious consequences. Eleanor was wrong. The jury found her guilty on all charges after deliberating for less than 4 hours. The judge sentenced Eleanor to 12 years in prison and ordered her to pay restitution to all of her victims. Eleanor also lost her real estate license and was banned from working in property development for the rest of her life. Marcus attended Eleanor's sentencing hearing, not because he wanted revenge, but because he wanted to see justice served. When the judge asked if Marcus wanted to make a statement about how Eleanor's crimes had affected him, Marcus stood up and spoke calmly. "Your Honor, Mrs. Blackwood's actions taught me that sometimes peaceful people have to fight to protect what they value. But her actions also taught me that there are good people in law enforcement and the legal system who will stand up for what is right. I hope that Mrs. Blackwood's time in prison gives her a chance to think about the harm she caused and to become a better person. After the trial, Marcus returned to his quiet life in Millbrook Heights. But his life was no longer as solitary as it had been before Eleanor's harassment campaign. Marcus's workshop was now a gathering place for veterans who came to work on motorcycles and share their experiences. Marcus also found that his neighbors treated him with new respect after learning about his military service and his stand against the criminals who had threatened him. People who had never spoken to Marcus before would wave when they drove past his property. Some neighbors even stopped by to ask for advice about home security or to thank him for making the area safer. Marcus still woke up every morning at 5 o'clock and still started each day with coffee on his front porch. But now he often had company as other veterans arrived early to work on their motorcycle projects. The sound of multiple engines being rebuilt filled Marcus's workshop, and the conversations between veterans created a sense of community that Marcus had not expected when he first moved to his quiet property. 3 years after the incident with the Iron Wolves, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed. He had successfully defended his property and brought criminals to justice. He had started a successful program that was helping other veterans. And he had discovered that sometimes the best way to find peace is to help other people find their own paths to healing and purpose. Marcus Thompson, the retired Navy SEAL, had finally found the meaningful retirement he had always wanted. It was not the solitary life he had originally planned, but it was better than anything he could have imagined. Marcus had learned that true peace comes not from avoiding,